The three most common objects we're going to have in Active Directory will be user objects. Now, many people call this a user account, but what the user object or account actually does, a couple of things. One, it provides authentication for the user at log on. My user, let's say Bob Ross, he has a username and password. Anytime he attempts to authenticate, he has to type in the username and password. Now, we assume only Bob knows the password, so we can verify that Bob is who he actually says he is. The other is access control. I want Bob to have certain access to data, and we'll say applications. And I say data, I mean like shared folders. Well, ultimately, permissions can be assigned that control what Bob has access to. If we move on to groups for a moment, groups simplify assigning permissions. So these two things, they truly go together. Access control and simplifying assigning permissions. Let's say I have this folder and it is sales data. Then I have this other folder and it's sales reports. In my sales department, I have these sales users, and we're going to say it is 90 employees or 90 users that work in sales. So 90 people need access to this sales data and to this sales reports. What you could do, which would be extremely painful, is go to this sales data folder and you could assign permission to these 90 users individually. So if this is Bob, I could say, Bob, you have read access to this folder. Bob, you have read access to this folder. But then you have to do that for the other 89 users, and you have to do it for every single piece of data you want them to access. That is incredibly inefficient. So instead, what we would do, we would create a group. So let's say this group here is sales users. I would simply make Bob a member of this group, along with the other 89 users that work in sales. So all 90 sales users are a member of a sales users group. Now, I will take this sales users group and I will assign it the correct permission. So we'll say read permission. It gets assigned permissions for both of these objects. Now, I'm pretty much done. Tomorrow, if I'm informed we've hired 5 new salespeople, all I need to do with my new salespeople is make them a member of the sales users group. As soon as I do that, they will automatically have access to all the resources that the sales users group has been assigned. So they're going to be able to access the sales data folder here and the sales reports just because they're a member of this group. Eliminates the need of me going to all these individual folders every time a user needs access. You create your groups. Groups get assigned permissions. Then you make users members of groups. So primary purpose, simplify assigning permissions. Objects that I sometimes call the forgotten object is the computer object. Usually when people think about Active Directory, you think of users logging on, policies, those types of things. But every computer in our domain has been joined to the domain. So I'm going to have a computer account. This computer has been joined to my Active Directory domain. Now, every time the computer starts up, it actually authenticates itself against Active Directory. So on your domain controller, I'm just going to say DC for my domain controller, you're going to have a computer account. The computer actually has a password. Now, you don't see it, you don't manage it, change it, or anything like that, but there is a password associated with the computer account in Active Directory. What happens, every time this computer starts up, it attempts to authenticate against the domain controller. What it does is authenticate using the computer account and the computer password. If they both authenticate, the computer just powers up normally, then my user logs in. Now, this password, just a fun fact, it changes every 30 days. So let's say you have a computer that's been powered off for 60 days. Maybe your user took an extended vacation or something like that. Then they return 60 days later. When they power this computer up, it's going to start up normally, or so it appears. But then when my user tries to log into it, we'll say Bob. Bob is going to get a nasty message that tells him the trust relationship cannot be established between the client and the domain, and Bob's not going to be able to log on from this computer. That computer, you either just rejoin it to the domain, but it'll repair this relationship between the client computer and the domain controller. In reality, it generates a new password, is what it actually does. So computers do have passwords. We just don't manage them. If you've ever seen that error message, those of you that already work in IT, the trust could not be established between the client and the domain, that's exactly what it means. Somehow they disagree about the authentication, the computer account and the domain controller. So those are our three objects, but just like in any environment, most of the effort will be with users' groups. Computers are joined to the domain, then that's really all you do with them. Now, we'll create some policies to manage settings and things like that, but most of the objects you manage on a day-to-day basis will be users and groups.